All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Shannon Farrell at Oklahoma State University. Thank you all very much for taking the time out of your afternoon to visit with us on some of these farm labor issues. I'm the Ag WAS specialist here at Oklahoma State University. Dr. Rodney Jones is our Ag Finance specialist, as well as doing a lot of work in farm and ranch management. We unashamedly stole him from Kansas State University, where he'd done a lot of good work in farm human resource management. And so what we're doing today is part one in a three-part series about how you can manage some of your human resource issues on the farm. I mean, we love to tell you all the answers and that we've got this secret hidey hole where all of the good farm workers are hiding out, but we don't. So what we're going to try to do is help you think a little bit through some of the issues surrounding the labor needs for your farm or ranch, and then how you can kind of go about proactively addressing those in a good, efficient, and also legal kind of way. Today we're going to be talking about that first step, identifying what you actually need for the farm in terms of your human resource pool, and then how you go about recruiting those folks. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategic planning today. We're going to talk a little bit about formulating a human resource assessment for your farm. And you may be thinking to yourself, Farrell, that's great. I got to go do some stuff. I've got tons of production work to do on the farm. I don't have time to be strategic thinking and all that mumbo jumbo. And we get that. But we think if you take just a little bit of time and sit down and really analyze what you need in terms of the skills on your ranch, that's going to help you tailor your search much better and will hopefully increase your odds of finding the person that actually is a fit for your particular operation. So with that, I'm going to turn things over first to Dr. Jones. He's going to tell you a little bit about figuring out your strategic plan for the farm or ranch and then using that to inform what skills you need in the people that you're going to bring on. So without further ado, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Shannon, and please let me know, one or two people, if you can for sure hear me. I think you can, but if something is not working right, need to know that right away here. You manage a lot of resources on a farm or ranch, and the human resources are actually some of the tougher resources to manage. For a lot of reasons, not certainly limited to, but certainly including the fact that we're dealing with individual personalities, we're dealing with individual emotions. Human resources are not all the same across individuals, and a number of other reasons that we're going to talk about over the course of this webinar series. Now, for those of you who are visual learners or who like to kind of get a visual of the big picture, I like this illustration as you think about your human resource situation on your farm or ranch. Think of your farm or ranch business as a bus. Maybe it's a minivan if you're a small operation. Maybe it's a larger cross-country bus if you're a larger operation, but I think the visual outlines the overall scope of the problem and the primary questions that need to be asked and answered quite well. Question number one, do you have the right people on your bus? Period. Do you have the right people on your bus, including family members, non-family members, etc. Question number two, are those people that you do have on your bus, even if they are the right people, are they in the right seat? Are they in the right positions within your particular farming or ranching operation? And as you ponder that question, or those two questions, I'm sorry, you may discover that you need to make some changes. Maybe you have some people on your business bus that really don't belong on your business bus. Or perhaps more likely, maybe you have some people on your bus that are very valuable to your business, but they're not in exactly the right seat. They're not in exactly the right set of responsibilities and duties, and not matching up well with their particular skill set, etc. So just to kind of set the stage here, I'm going to throw out a question, and in the interest of full disclosure, I think I borrowed this from some material that Dr. Bob Milligan presented at some seminar somewhere, and I got a copy of the proceeds, so I'm going to give Bob full credit for this, although I've used various versions and maybe some slightly different examples, but I give Bob full credit for this. But if you were, let's say, sitting in a conference away from your farm or ranch, maybe you're 500 miles away from the home farm or ranch. In this example, it's a dairy farm, and you get one of two calls. And call number one might be your largest dairy barn, for example, just burned down, and 50 head of your best livestock were just lost in a fire. That's illustration number one of a call that you can imagine might come in. Illustration number two is your three absolute best employees have left, and they've made it very clear that they're not coming back. And so the overall question for you is, which one of those two calls would be more upsetting to you? And I guess we're here to argue that yes, both would immediately be upsetting. Of course, you're going to be a little bit distraught and having to put some things in motion to solve some problems. If you had some kind of a physical disaster, a fire or a tornado or something like that, you've got to get some things fixed. But those things are fixable, and we have kind of a plan for getting them fixed. On the other hand, if you got call number two, that means that you have some kind of a serious culture problem in your organization, and it quite likely may bring your organization down. You have some key employees that have become dissatisfied, left, made it very clear they're not coming back. They're not going to be positive spokespersons for your organization. So again, just a couple of questions to kind of set the stage for this whole webinar series. Now, there's of course a easy 7-step plan to anything. We have a 7-step program or plan for staffing on the farm or ranch. We're going to go through 7 steps in the course of this overall webinar series. We're going to talk about assessing human resource needs for your operation, preparing job descriptions, preparing yourself to be an employer is kind of step number 2 or task number 2. And we're going to talk about recruiting, interviewing, and hiring employees. We're going to cover those 3 today, and then in subsequent webinars over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about getting new employees on board, specific tasks for new hires and people who hire new people. We're going to talk about working with current employees, training, orientation, motivation, whether it's a new employee or whether it's a seasoned employee, things that are important. We're going to talk about evaluating employee performance, and along with that, providing coaching and feedback. And we're going to talk about a few issues related to compensation. So that's just a very brief overview of the webinar series. Again, we're going to cover 1, 2, and 3 in at least some degree of detail today. So as Shannon mentioned, we're going to start the process at the core. We're going to start assessing your human resource needs at the very fundamental foundation of your business. What your business is all about. This is not a visioning webinar. That, in fact, is a couple hour long presentation along with some visioning exercises in and of itself. But a reflection on that business vision is important as we think about staffing issues. Those of you listening in who are farm or ranch operators or who are facing this decision about hiring people, as a first step, have your thoughts about the vision for your farm in mind. Where is it that we're headed? Where is this organization headed? And along with that, kind of the next step in the process are a little more concrete concepts, what we're all about today. mission, the goals that we have set out for ourselves. These are shorter term but still somewhat abstract concepts. What are we trying to accomplish today, this week? The point of this slide being that your entire team including family members and non-family members and employees and perhaps other stakeholders, needs to understand and have buy-in. Everybody wants to be part of a winning team. The only way that that is possible is if those people who want to be part of a winning team and will put forth a lot of effort to achieve that objective is if they know what winning or success would look like. What is it we're trying to accomplish? So having the end in mind, beginning with a vision and a more concrete mission and some goals and objectives is of course very important in the human resource management and needs assessment process. Employers need to be very open regarding that vision, that mission, those goals, those objectives, however much detail you want to put into that. Everybody needs to know where we're headed and how we intend to get there. Organizational success needs to be identified with or linked with the success and the accomplishments of each individual team member in order to inspire top performance. And I know these are big picture abstract concepts, but those few slides could be perhaps for many people the most important topics that we cover today. With that said, let's move away from that big picture material and talk about some more concrete details and concrete ideas. How do we figure out what our human resource needs are anyway? How do we figure out whether we need to bring some more individuals onto our bus and where they need to fit in that bus? How much work do we need to get done? How much work do we need to get done? How much labor is needed to do that amount of work? How many hours? How many quarters of a full-time person, for example? And how much labor is currently available the way we are staffed right now? How many family members do we have, and how much time can they contribute to the operation, or how many current employees do we have? A systematic tool that will help us to do that is a very simple human resource needs or labor resource needs chart, broken down by month, by quarter, by seasonal tasks, whatever the case may be. Here are some big picture tasks or big picture skill needs that we have that need to be done. Approximately how many hours of that type of labor do we need, and what do we currently have available, and where are the holes? The reason this is important is that people, as I mentioned earlier, are somewhat unique as a resource, as businesses have to manage many resources, in that people, human beings, usually come in what those of us in academia like to call 1 FTE increments, meaning one full-time equivalent person. That's usually the way somebody who needs a job presents themselves to you, and that's usually what you have to deal with. Not always. There are some opportunities, of course, for part-time labor in certain situations, but the norm is that human beings come in 1 unit increments, and they'd like to be employed enough such that they can accomplish the financial goals that they have in mind, which usually means working about full-time, 40, 45, maybe 50 hours a week. Human beings are not as easily divisible as some of the other resources that we use on the farm. On our farm and ranch here in Oklahoma, we're currently in the process of preparing to plant some fall crops, for example, and we're doing some spraying. So I can go down to the supplier and I can buy enough spray resources, chemicals, etc., for 5 loads or 1 load or a half a load, whatever I happen to need, 50 acres or 100 acres or 500 acres. I can buy it in essentially any increment that I want, as opposed to the labor resource, which again usually comes as a whole person. The second problem with human resources is they usually come with a specific skill set, and that skill set is different among different people. Some are good at certain tasks, others are good at other tasks. So if we develop a chart like the one illustrated here in the slide set, we can start to break down by task groupings how many hours of labor we need. In this example, for example, every quarter of the year, so that we can identify shortfalls. And in this case, in this example, it's pretty obvious, as is often the case during the busy season. We need 2 or 3, if you consider, say, 500 hours a quarter to be one full-time person, 2,000 hours a year or 2,200 hours a year, something like that. First quarter of the year, we can probably get by with 1 person in the operations category there. They can probably put in 700 hours with a little bit of extra effort. But by the time we get to the second and third quarter, we need 3 people, and then we need 2 people, and then we're back down to needing 1 person. Whereas, of course, if you kind of hypothesize that the same skill set might be able to do both management and marketing tasks, if you add those 2 subtotals together, we might be able to get by with 1 person year-round doing those 2 sets of tasks, if they're willing to put in a little bit of overtime at certain times of the year, etc. So this example illustrates that yes, we have a serious bottleneck about that second or third quarter, and what we really need is somebody who can perform operations on the farm, manage livestock, crops, and machinery, for example. So that's kind of a first step, assessing our needs, who we have available, and what we might need to go on top of that. Then we need to prepare job descriptions. Job descriptions for all positions, even the ones currently filled, and yes, even the ones filled by family members. So we're going to use job descriptions in the recruitment process. It's going to force the supervisor to clarify responsibilities and duties and so forth in writing, make critical decisions about how that position is going to be defined, and help to communicate to current employees as well as potential employees throughout the entire human resource management process. In this specific example, using it as a tool to help in the recruitment process. What does this person do, or what's this person going to be expected to do? Who are they going to report to? How are they going to be evaluated? When we need someone new in our operation, that may be a good time to evaluate all of the positions in our operation and see if we need to do some shuffling around on the bus, for example. Give somebody who's currently an employee a few additional responsibilities, or maybe shift some away from somebody if we have somebody else who's developed a skill set in a particular area. Job descriptions, very important. Just a few key elements associated with job descriptions. Important to have a job title, a summary of the position, typical duties, tasks, responsibilities, a summary at least of working conditions, required knowledge, skill sets, abilities, those kind of things. Also very important, how's the job going to be evaluated, who's going to evaluate it, and how will the job be compensated. So I have 2 slides here, just real quickly, an example that we put together based on another example that we found. I believe it came originally from Purdue. We added a few things, but you can find example agricultural job descriptions out on the web. We've just put together one here. It takes a couple slides. I'm not going to go through all the details, but you can see here we have a general description of the job, just a very short paragraph, and then as specific as possible, as specific as we can possibly be, just some typical duties, tasks, and responsibilities that would be associated with that position. For example, in this particular instance, monitoring the quality of stored grains is important. Task number 2 there, being able, having the knowledge and skill set to get equipment ready ahead of time and then operate that equipment and maintain that equipment. Doing it in a safe manner, just kind of going down the list here. Finally, number 8 there, we left that in out of the example that we were working off of because just to kind of point out that, that it's often important to emphasize that it is important that employees, as part of their tasks and responsibilities, enjoy what they do and provide suggestions for making the whole organization better off. Again, be honest about working conditions. If this position is going to require people to get out and feed cattle in the middle of a blizzard, they need to know that. If they're going to have to lift 50 pounds or more, if they're going to have to put in long hours during certain times of the year, that's important to know. Required knowledge, skills, and abilities. Here in this example, these happen to all be skills and abilities, but if you require a certain educational level attainment, spell that out right in the job description. If you require a bachelor's degree or a certification of some skill or a commercial driver's license, for example, what are some educational requirements, knowledge, skills, and abilities? And then how's the position going to be evaluated and who's going to be doing the evaluation? In this case, it's going to be evaluated on an annual basis, but then also coaching and feedback provided on an ongoing basis by the direct supervisor that was pointed out earlier. And then how will the job be compensated? What is the compensation package, including benefits and perhaps fringes, the opportunity for bonuses? Here we have a position that doesn't necessarily pay all that well, but they have housing provided, they have some meals provided, maybe some other perks as well. So job descriptions, very important, not only for the positions that you're trying to recruit for, but for every position in the organization. It will certainly help clarify roles and responsibilities. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon for a few slides.
All right, gang. First off, we were having a little bit of a problem with my audio. I apologize for that. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I had to jump offline and completely reboot the system, so hopefully we're working now. Rod did an excellent job of setting you guys up to be prepared to be an employer. One thing you have to think about, though, is that if you're going to have people that aren't family members on your farm or ranch, there are a few other considerations that you've got to bear in mind. One is, do I need to have an entity structure for this farming or ranching operation? And that's a whole other webinar. We're not going to go into that too much right now. But one thing we would say is, consider whether you should have an LLC, a corporation, or some other sort of limited liability entity if you're going to have lots of other people operating on your farm, or if you're just engaging in lots of activities where there might be a risk of injury or property damage. And that might mean that we're just putting the operations side of our farm or ranch into, say, an LLC or a corporation, but leaving the land held by an individual. That's okay. The point of the discussion is simply think about it, talk to your attorney, talk to your tax professional, and see what the pros and cons of some different entity forms might be for the liability profile that your operation has. Do not try to do this at home. Don't go grab a form book. Don't go hop on a website and just try to figure out for yourself. Make sure you've got a good professional team of attorneys and tax professionals there to kind of guide you through that. Speaking of those tax professionals, if we're going to be employing someone, we've got to be prepared for tax withholding, because a lot of these thresholds are simply triggered by having one employee or by having a payroll that's still pretty modest. So anytime that we're hiring a new employee, we should ask ourselves, what kind of tax withholding are we going to need? Are we going to have to do state and federal income tax withholding, FICA tax withholding, state and federal unemployment withholding? Those are all things we need to be prepared for, and some of those may be fairly straightforward. Some of those may take enrollment in, say, for example, a state electronic deposit system. For example, some states require that if you're going to be withholding state-level employment taxes or state-level income taxes, you have to have those deposited electronically with the state via the electronic deposit system. So look for your specific state's requirements, and usually those are fairly easy to find, and see what I need to do to be an employer and make those withholdings. Another thing to consider is our new hire reporting requirements. At the federal level and at most state levels as well, you're required to report when you hire a new employee, and usually it's a very straightforward electronic system. But the reason for that is that many states have child support payment reporting systems, and that's administered through a new hire reporting system, so that you make sure that if you're hiring someone, if they have any outstanding obligations, any garnishments or anything like that, can be handled. So there are just a few pieces there. We'll talk about all these again in the forthcoming handbook, which we'll talk about at the end of the seminar, so wait for that. But these are a few things that you just need to think about if you're in the position where you're about to take on that new employee. So with that, now we've talked about figuring out what we need. We've talked about how to prepare to be an employer. Let's go out there and actually find the person that fits our needs. And for that, let's go back to Dr. Jones.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about recruiting. That's kind of, I realize we have it listed as task number 3, but it's kind of the first step in the process of actually getting someone on board. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the most common mistakes that small business managers in general make in recruiting potential employees is not investing the time and effort required to do the job well. It takes time. We want to find and reach out to a pool of good candidates. Raises the issue of having a contingency plan for backup labor to get the job done while we are in the process of taking time to recruit a pool of good candidates and get the right person on board permanently to fill a slot. You lose a critical employee in your operation, the job has to get done. You don't want to just be in a situation where you're forced to hire the first warm body that comes along just because I've got to have somebody to do this task. A good friend of mine once said, you're far better off to have an open position and wish you had an employee to fill that position than to have an employee that you wish to heck you didn't have. So this kind of gets to that a little bit. What is your plan for getting the job done in the meantime while we're finding the right person? That could involve cross-training, a broad mix of current people in your organization so that several people can step in and do the job that you need filled. It could mean we need to custom hire some work done for a while, etc., while we take time to accomplish the recruiting task. Remember, recruitment is a process of attracting individuals. That's with an S, more than one. You want to have a pool to choose from. We want to recruit individuals on a timely basis. We don't want this to stretch out forever. We want sufficient numbers, and we want applicants with the appropriate qualifications to be potentially a good fit for jobs within our organization. So, how do we recruit? What are some methods for getting the word out to try to get a pool of well-qualified applicants in a timely manner? Here are a few suggestions. The first one actually has the word suggestions in it. Make it known to your current employees if you have a positive culture around your organization, if you're viewed as being a good place to work, and your current employees know that you have an open spot, they might pass the word. They might visit with folks that they know of, or folks that they know about at church or wherever the case may be, whatever activities they're involved in. They will quickly pass the word around if they're happy and you have a good positive culture within your organization. So suggestions from current employees, just word of mouth around the community. Make it known around the community with folks that interact with other folks within your circle of friends that you have an opening And in general, this is the kind of person that you're looking for, and here's where people can go to find that specific job description or that application packet. Want ads, of course, think broadly here, not just the local paper, as has been the historical mechanism for want ads, but the internet, social media, etc. All kinds of want ad opportunities out there broadly defined. Government job service agencies, of course. College placement offices. More and more we are having farm and ranch operations come to our universities, our university placement offices, our university career placement activities, looking for good people. And that is not a bad place to look for certain skill sets. Posting job announcements in places where people hang out around the community. And then there are, of course, all kinds of search firms, internet-based search firms, and others. So those are just a few suggestions depending on exactly the type of person that you may be looking for. Targeting your advertising efforts. Developing those want ads or that information that you're going to give to that search firm, for example, or the information in that poster that you're going to hang up around the community, etc., etc., a card that you might hand out for people to pass around, letting other folks know that you have a position available. Some key things that need to be included in that advertisement, however you define that. The appropriate job title. Say something positive about the business. Describe the job a little bit. Realize, you know, this is your little poster. You know, you don't have the whole job announcement here. This is hoping to steer people toward the job announcement, the position description, etc. So describe the job just a little bit. Highlight positive working conditions. If appropriate, maybe provide just a little bit of information about the salary range or unique benefits that may be available. And then do not forget to indicate in your advertisement how to apply for the job. Who do I contact? What's a phone number? The old typical classified ad in the paper that just says farm help wanted makes for a very inexpensive, I would even say cheap, classified advertisement on the part of the person buying the ad, but it likely won't attract a ton of interest among well-qualified applicants. It's just not descriptive enough. And I have actually seen some, and who knows whether this was an oversight on the part of the person writing the ad or on the part of the newspaper, but I've actually seen some that do have a little bit of a help wanted ad and then no information about how to get a hold of somebody to start the application process. So make sure that all of those ducks are in a row, so to speak, regarding how to find out more about this position and how to apply. Now, the next phase is selecting the best candidate out of all of the applicants. Remember, the recruiting step is designed to generate a pool, in other words, several candidates that are qualified. The selection process is step number 2 in actually getting someone on board, and that's choosing the best. We want to select the best out of a pool of qualified applicants. So the application itself, the form that they have to fill out, if you will, to apply for the job, we need information that is relevant and pertinent to the job. Ask the right questions on the application. If the job requires a certain level of educational attainment, ask that question. If the job requires previous experience and a previously acquired skill set, ask the right questions so that we can find out if the applicant has that particular skill set. The application process can be a pretty good predictor of future performance. And again, that process can help us weed out unqualified applicants fairly quickly. There are certain things that we can and can't ask in the application and interviewing process. We'll talk about that at least a little bit more later on. Shannon, I'm going to turn it back over to you to start talking about the interview process itself.
All right, thanks, Rod. So we've gotten this pool of folks together. We feel like they at least have the minimum set of qualifications that we're looking for. Now, how do we go about that actual selection process? And almost always we're going to have some sort of face-to-face interaction with those applicants, and we're probably going to do that in the form of an interview. So when you're preparing for the interview, you've got the application materials in front of you. You've got the resumes that have been turned in, if you do have any of those. You've kind of seen what the pool looks like. So let's figure out, how do we make the most of the limited amount of face time that we're going to have with each of those candidates? Because getting information that you've already got off any application materials is going to kind of be a waste of your time. You've already got that. So figure out, where do I get the most value from asking questions and interacting with that person while they're face-to-face with me? So to that end, let's write a list of questions about the skills, the traits, the viewpoints that we think are most important for that person being compatible with our operation, and be consistent about that as you go across each applicant. And the reason for that is, if you ask different questions to different applicants in a different order, you're going to get different information about each candidate, which is going to make it really hard to compare apples to apples as you go through your candidate pool. So as you're doing that, then let's develop as best you can an objective rating system to determine how you think that that candidate lines up with respect to that performance trait. For example, it may be amount of experience they have with crop operations, experience with variable rate sprayers, you name it. But let's get all of our candidates lined up and objectively, peer-to-peer, apples to apples, evaluate how they performed in the interview relative to the other candidates. This will kind of help you stay consistent across your candidates and hopefully yield you better results at the end of the day. Now, this wouldn't be a good ag lawyer seminar if I didn't at least say some legal stuff. So let's talk about avoiding anything that could be discriminatory in the interview process. When you're in the interview, don't ask anything about any sort of protected trait. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 defines what those protected traits are. Most of your states are going to have individual statutes that deal with this as well. For example, here in the state of Oklahoma, we've got the Oklahoma Anti-Discrimination Act that more or less tracks with the Civil Rights Act and actually adds a couple of other traits. But race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and age, any question that goes towards those types of characteristics might get you in trouble. We're not saying that asking those questions is per se illegal, but it's definitely setting you up for a candidate who doesn't get the job to say, well, they asked me this question about a protected trait, they must have been trying to screen me based on that. So don't ask someone, hey, what's your race, or what religion do you practice, or anything like that. That's pretty obvious. But here's one that catches a lot of folks. When did you graduate from high school? Now, that seems like a pretty innocent question, but that can be used for age discrimination purposes. You're trying to figure out how old that person is based on when they graduated high school. So if having a high school degree is a legitimate requirement of the job, and when we say that, what we mean is, does someone really need the level of education that they would get by the completion of a high school diploma to successfully perform the tasks in this job? Okay, ask them, have you graduated high school or have you received a GED? That helps you figure out, do they have the skill set that they need without going towards protected trait. Similarly, without asking someone their age, you could say, are you old enough to have a commercial driver's license? Are you old enough to have a CDL? Are you old enough to operate equipment, bearing in mind that this equipment must be operated by someone over age 16, et cetera, et cetera. Try to keep things focused as much as possible on the bona fide requirements for the job. The closer that we keep the interview questions and the skills tests, if you have any of those, to what we're actually trying to measure as to whether this person could work well on this farm, the better off you are. And this last bullet point may be kind of funny to you when we say only allow trained personnel to conduct interviews, and you're thinking, well, I have a massive HR staff on my farm, ha ha ha. We get that. What we're saying is, before you delegate interviewing to someone else on your farm or ranch, make sure they understand the points that we're talking about here, and we'll refer them again to the Human Resources Handbook that we'll have forthcoming in a little bit about the things that you can ask, the things that you can't ask, and make sure that they stay on the same page with that. So let's talk about interview questions, but let's also talk about skills tests. You know, you might say, I need someone on this farm that can spray a field effectively. And in a subsequent webinar, we'll talk about training procedures, but for right now, you might say, hey, I want to see, can you operate that sprayer, okay? So if operating a sprayer is part of the job, it's okay to ask the person, hey, can you get into that sprayer and operate it? Because that's not just a function of their skill, it's also a function of their physical abilities. Can you get into this sprayer physically? If you're on a livestock operation, you may be picking up hay bales, you may be picking up feed sacks, and you might ask that person, are you capable of lifting a 50-pound sack up off the ground and moving it to shoulder level or over your head in terms of height? It's okay to ask that person if they can do that or if they can demonstrate that skill if it's really something they're going to do on the job. That's not a disability discrimination. It's a disability discrimination if you're asking someone who's going to be in an office job, can you lift a feed sack over your head? That is getting us away from the actual requirements of the job. That's where you kind of start to get into trouble. So just make sure the questions and any skill tests really do line up with what the actual requirements of the job are going to be. Now, on the last slide, we just said minimize small talk. Let's not talk about where you go to church, what community organizations you're in, or about your family, because those are all things that can kind of go to protected traits. But, you know, do try to put the applicant at ease, and you don't have to do that via small talk. You can just do that with your demeanor, your tone, your body language. You know, be polite, be respectful, open up your body language a little bit. Try to find a nice, comfortable place where you can have the conversation and make sure that you're not going to be interrupted by lots of phone calls, text messages, hired hands saying, hey, we really need to come see about this aspect of the farm. Try to make it a one-on-one conversation just in as much as you possibly can. And as it's a conversation, remember that conversations are a two-way street. Listen. Don't ask a lot of yes-no questions. Try to ask open-ended questions and let your candidate do the talking and then actually listen to what they're saying. Sounds pretty crazy, right? But actually that will elicit a lot of material. Also, don't be afraid of awkward silence. That pause was there just for effect, by the way, ha ha ha. But when there's that gap, people feel like they have to talk, right? So if you just listen and keep listening, you can elicit more information from your candidate. They'll volunteer more information, so don't be afraid to just pause and listen. That can be a very powerful tool for you. Step 4. You may have gone into this interview process thinking that you'd already identified the ideal candidate based on the application materials or just on the fact that you have a pre-existing relationship with someone, and it may well be that the best materials indicate the best candidate or that someone you have a personal relationship with would enable you to have a good, productive work relationship. But don't use that bias as a means of excluding the other candidates. You might be really surprised by someone who's out there that you didn't envision as being the good candidate, but might actually turn out to have the skill set you really need. So all we're really saying with this point is be open. Remember to go back to what Dr. Jones said. Think about what's the skill set needed to successfully complete these tasks on the farm, and let's find the candidate that matches that, so long as we feel that that candidate can work well within the culture and the values of our operation, okay? So don't overlook applicants that may be really well qualified just because they might go to a different church than you, might have a different ethnic background, maybe older or younger than you thought, because they're of a different gender or may have a disability. Be open-minded, because you really can sometimes overlook great candidates on something that's really not related to the job at all. When you're dealing with a candidate, both in the interview and afterwards, be honest. You know, you are trying to sell this position. Hey, this is a good place to work. This is a good operation. We think this is going to be good for you. But be forthright with them as well. Like Dr. Jones said earlier, if this job is going to have some tough working conditions. Say, for example, this farm or ranch is in Oklahoma. Well, you know what? You might be in a blizzard part of the year, and you might be in triple degree heat the rest of the year, and in the meantime, there are tornadoes, wildfires, and earthquakes. Okay, that's the joy of living in Oklahoma, right? But be honest with them about that. Give them an opportunity to ask questions. Again, this is a conversation. It's a two-way street. So by giving them the opportunity to ask questions, they feel a lot more engaged in the process as well, and that will kind of help you, without saying a word, sell your operation also. Have an outline of the package of benefits and wages that you're going to provide. Give them something to take home so they can consider that as they're going through their options as well. When you're dealing with your applicant pool, give them an honest expectation of when you're going to be able to make a decision about a hire or a lack of hire. And so as soon as applicants have been eliminated from the process, it's only fair to let them know that. Let them know that you appreciate them applying, that you are grateful for their time, but you're just not the fit that we needed right now. That's okay. Don't keep them out there on the stringer. You got to fish or cut bait, right? So try to do this as quickly as possible while still making sure that you give yourself enough time to make a considered employment decision there. As you go out there and you're checking references, be consistent with this process as well, okay? So generally, we'll tell your candidates that we're only going to check references perhaps after the interview process, because if you eliminated someone in the interview process, there's really no need of checking those references. So again, be forthright with that, and don't overlook references. I mean, the big companies that are making high-stakes employment decisions use reference checks, okay? So check those references, have an actual meaningful conversation with the people that you're talking to, and if you've made it clear throughout the process that you can check indirect references, that's very valuable as well. And if you're not familiar with an indirect reference, what you might say to the candidates is, we have your list of, let's say, 3 references here. Is it okay if we contact those references for an indirect reference? And that indirect reference is someone that a reference says, you should also talk to Dr. Jones or Professor Geringer about this person because I know they've worked with them. You can get some really good information about the candidates from that. Be consistent in checking those references. Ask them meaningful, open-ended questions, again, not yes or no's, and really try to figure out what you can learn from their past work experience that will inform whether or not this person would be a good fit to your operation.